Hello, good evening. How are you all tonight? Good. All right. Intrepid fans of Jeff Sharlet are here even on a beautiful spring day. This nice weather, sometimes it's hard to get people inside. It shows the devotion of Jeff Sharlet's fans. I'm Joel Whitney, the library from the library's Arts and Culture curatorial team, which is called BPL Presents. Jeff and his book have gotten fresh praise. Hot off the presses, Joseph O'Neill writing the New York Times book review called The Undertow, a riveting, vividly detailed collage of political and moral derangement in America. The Boston Globe called The Undertow a foreboding drive through the backroads of the country's rising militancy. From campy Trump rallies and a memorial service for the January 6th insurrectionist Ashley Babbitt to a televangelist church in Miami and a self-declared prophet in Omaha, Sharlet takes a hard, unwavering look at the nation's guns and Bibles underbelly. Before I introduce Jeff and his co-conversant, Virginia Heffernan, I'm going to invite you to join us in the weeks to come. We have the People's Ball, a crowd favorite here in Brooklyn. We sort of in-house call it the anti-Met Gallery. What could be the opposite of a $30,000 ticket? A free ticket to come and walk the runway here in Brooklyn in your best Sunday garb, as well as an event celebrating the English language in an anthology called The People's Tongue by Restless Books. The People's Ball is the end of April. The People's Tongue is on April 4th. And on April 14th, Rebecca Solnit is here to discuss a new anthology of environmental writing and climate hope titled Not Too Late. So to RSVP to these and other upcoming events, please go to Brooklyn, bklynlibrary.org/BPL Presents, and it's the same on social media. Now, tonight, an unmatched guide to the religious dimensions of American politics, Jeff Sharlet journeys into the corners of our national psyche where others fear to tread. The Undertow is both inquiry and meditation, an attempt to understand how, over the last decade, reaction has morphed into delusion, social division into distrust, distrust into paranoia, and hatred into fantasies, sometimes realities of violence. It will be on sale in the lobby, as you saw from our friends at Greenlight. Jeff is the New York Times bestselling author or editor of 8 books, including The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power, adapted into a Netflix documentary series, and This Brilliant Darkness. Virginia Heffernan writes essays and features about tech, culture, and politics for Wired. She is also a frequent contributor to the LA Times, The Atlantic, The Economist, and MSNBC. And her new article is on the cover of Wired now called, it's about the face of God in the semiconductors. So please welcome our 2 panelists.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Brooklyn Public Library. Jeff is a friend of mine. I have a collegial online phone podcast relationship with you, but I'm beholding you for the first time, which is very satisfying in person. Maybe that's the place to start. There is a lot in this book about bodies in space. And I think that's a really interesting component of the book. Online phenomena, as we now know, became embodied in Charlottesville and then on January 6th. And you do such a good job talking about that strange transition, the way that radical right movements came to life around the 2016 election. Maybe you can start with what you wanted to read about the body of one Ashley Babbitt. Wait, am I forgetting her last name? Is that it?
Babbitt, yeah.
Ashley Babbitt. Say her name, right?
Say her name. Hashtag say her name, which is what they did, appropriating that from Sandra Bland, and they said, now this hashtag's perfect. Let's apply it to a white woman, a right-wing white woman.
Yeah, you do a wonderful job. We'll talk more about that kind of projection and appropriation. But go ahead and read something. I just like to I'm sure you've all read the book many, many times. You have got notes and so on.
Came out
But
today.
in case you missed, yes, exactly.
If you did.
But now we'll know what we're talking, and in some literal way, be on the same page. So I've asked him to read a section.
Yeah, so Ashley Babbitt, some of you may know. Well, you'll hear, and I was watching that as many of us were real time, and as soon as I saw it, I knew, well, we'll talk more about what the right was going to do with, in some ways, with her body made myth. The Capitol, January 6, 2021. We watched her die before we knew her name. We watched almost in real time, or soon after. Her death looped and memed before the fight for the Capitol was over. A shaky video gives us a crowd throbbing against two wooden windowed windows, one reinforced glass pane spiderwebbing, three Capitol police officers, oddly passive, standing between the crowd and members of Congress on the other side. We don't know yet to look for her, but she's there on the screen, the only woman. She's up front. A firecracker, her friends will say, screaming at cops. Joking, her defenders will claim. There's a knife in her pocket. She shouts, "Just open the door." It's barricaded, tables and chairs. "Break it down," chants the crowd. A young man wearing a tight black t-shirt and a $325 black Canada Goose aviator fur hat shouts, "Hey!" He stretches out his arms, each a delta of pulsing veins. He has already punched the glass, hard, and opens his palms, calming, no, gathering. "Fuck the blue," shouts the crowd. A tall white man, wearing a yellow "Don't Tread on Me" flag, tied like a bib beneath his red MAGA hat, hands Goose a heavy black helmet with which to batter the glass. Footnote. In this essay, footnotes run through as a way of, I'm thinking about how to tell stories about fascism, and I think the old ways don't work, so there's a little bit of a kind of running critique of my own work. Footnote. Canada Goose is Zachary Jordan Allam. He's 29 years old, a University of Virginia grad, the son of a Pakistani immigrant. His father is a biologist who works for the government. The man with the Gadsden flag bib is Christopher Ray Grider. He is 39, co-owner with his wife of a vineyard in Texas named Kissing Tree. For the hackberry tree, they climbed together as high school freshmen. After he is contacted by law enforcement, his wife, Crystal, will get rid of her husband's red hat and his yellow rattlesnake flag. Back to the body. Goose lines the helmet with his furry hat to cushion his fist. The three cops slide out of the way. Escape route, one will later tell investigators. They thought they were going to be killed. "Go, go, get this shit," the videographer shouts. They get that shit, pounding the reinforced glass. "Gun," the videographer yells. Two hands emerge from behind a pillar on the other side, aiming. 14 seconds left. Does she hear them shout, "Gun"? Can she make out the warnings that Michael Byrd, a plainclothes lieutenant, and the Capitol Police will say he delivers? That the man standing beside her will say, "She didn't heed." "Please," Byrd will say, he shouted, "stop, get back." She doesn't. He aims. "Center mass," he'll say. There she is, bobbing up and down, straining, her long, smooth face, her dark golden hair, her golden skin. She has come to this moment. 7 seconds now. More cops flowing up the stairs, assault rifles at the ready. From Ocean Beach, California, where she lived in a bungalow beneath an avocado and lime trees. Little woman, 5'2", 115 pounds, her mother will say. 110, according to Representative Paul Gosar, an Arizona Republican who will make her name into a martyr song. Hashtag "One More in the Name of Love," recasting U2's anthem for Martin Luther King Jr. as a tribute to her. She's 35, or in her 20s, one witness will say, or 16, supposedly, according to a pastor, each middle-aged man aging the dead woman backwards into the imagined innocence of girlhood. Footnote. Martyr. The word is derived from an ancient Greek term for witness. In early Christianity, it came to mean one who bears witness with the sacrifice of their life. The insurrectionist pastor who declares her 16, supposedly, Ren Shuffman of Freedom Fellowship in Mustang, Oklahoma, is yet a different kind of witness, that of social media, one who bears memes. 16, says Pastor Shuffman in a video he makes outside the Capitol shortly after the shooting. He says 16 4 times. Then he finds a man who really did witness her die. About 16, suggests the pastor. I don't know exactly how old, the witness answers. Pastor Shuffman persists. Okay, but young. He needs her to be young. The witness cooperates. She was young. Then Shuffman prays for the witness, for this bearded, camouflaged, middle-aged man, the true protagonist of the martyr myth in which the dead woman is merely deus ex machina. And I have to say, just, I've never said deus ex machina out loud, and I don't know if I am saying it correctly. And I was just reading, Virginia, your Magic and Loss, where at the beginning your father scolds you for your Latin. Yes, and I know that you went to Latin camp.
I went to Latin camp, yeah.
Did I get it right?
Yes.
All right.
Oh no, well, nobody knows how to pronounce Latin.
Okay.
I think you chose wisely.
It was legitimate.
I think you chose. Can we agree, an unconventional pronunciation?
Okay. All right.
But I like it.
Thank you for all not tittering when I said that. I never said it out loud.
Oh no, it was beautiful, and the whole passage was. I want to maybe start with something you said, by the way, as you were reading that, which is that our old ways of thinking about how to tell the stories of fascism are not suited to it anymore, or maybe they never were.
Yeah.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
I'm not sure if I think they never were, because I think of this wonderful writer from the 1930s, Meredith Lesueur, and a great essay of hers called, I think, Then We Are Marching. And she goes to cover a strike, and strikers have already been killed in this fight. And she goes as a journalist, but people start, there's blood, there's people need to be taken care of, and people shove things into her hands. And what is she to do when someone is lying there, right? And so the they becomes the we, right? And that to me is really, I think, essential. And part of this too, because the we here is not just the resistance, but I use, when I'm going to a Trump rally or at a militia church, I use the first person plural because I'm part of that crowd. I don't get to separate myself and put myself above. I'm complicit. And it would be one thing to look at them as monsters and separate from myself, but they're human and I'm human. What they're capable of, I'm capable of. I choose another way. They choose this way. And I think to understand those choices rather than simple monstrosity, we have to kind of do that work. And I feel like we're at a moment right now where there's real resistance, very understandable resistance to engaging with the vast complicity of whiteness and monstrosity and fascism.
Yeah, I mean, you do a beautiful job. I think of you, Dave Eggers has done some of this, and Jared Yates Sexton, people who early on during Trump's rise or during the kind of convocation of the MAGA movement, decided to go to the rallies. Tell me about why that drove you. I mean, you speaking of choosing another path, most of us chose to avoid them. But
yeah, and I had resolved actually the first chapter in this book, which is sort of about, in some ways scenes from a slow civil war, and the first chapter is about Harry Belafonte, and partly because I just couldn't stand to begin it with horror, but also because I wanted to think in terms of the long struggle. And I wrote that piece at a point when I'd resolved to write no more about right-wing movements, which I'd already been doing for a long time then. But then came Trump, and I recognized in 2015 what Trump was because a group that I'd written a lot about called The Family, this sort of kind of more elite Christian nationalist organization, very international, they'd supported figures like Trump in other countries around the world for a long time. And they'd always kind of kept a little bit of a firewall of here's the establishment in the United States. And this was the fascism that they had broadcast overseas finally come home.
This is like Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort.
Paul Manafort, yeah, all these kind of, these sort of like, these establishment elite guys. And so in 2015, I went around and to my editors, and if any of the editors who were there at the time who sort of scoffed and said, no, Sharlet, you can't write about Trump. You're not funny enough. He's a joke, right? And I'm like, you know, like I'm like maybe sometimes moderate funny, but not very funny. That's funny. My Latin is funny. And it wasn't until the sort of spring of 2016, and an editor of mine who I'd worked with sort of said, you know, do you think that these rallies are religious? And I'm like, well, of course. That's what I had always been interested in. And I started going to those rallies, and I was like, but I'm not going to go. If you were a journalist who went and stood in that metal pen, forgive me for what I'm going to say, but you made yourself a prop for Trump. And you should have seen that coming. And anyone who speaks, and I heard it on the radio today, I heard so many pundits saying about the so-called maybe arrest of Trump. He trolled us. Of course he wasn't going to get arrested today, but he got a full day of media coverage, right? I still hear pundits say, just theater. Pundits in New York City saying just theater. What do you mean just theater? Theater is real. Theater is serious. And I didn't want to play the assigned role, so I would go and just be a part of it, and that meant, you know, you stand for 10 hours in the sun and then 6 hours on the concrete, but that's the experience. That lets you know this is how it becomes a we instead of a they of what this Trumpist movement is.
So you come to decide to do this, and I don't know if, I've never said this to you, but I don't know if you had this, well, I'm going to try to crystallize one of the most, you know, I was trying in slow motion to try to figure out, try to pull apart how horrifying some of the sensations were of the, you know, of those of 2016 to 2021 up through January 6th. And I just saw All Quiet on the Western Front. I don't recommend it, but this remake. And I remember sort of thinking at the time, well, every time I touch any artifact that has to do with World War I, I get this really heavy nausea because it's a time where people, Kaisers and czars, are deciding in rooms things and getting colicky and pissed off and neurotic and like about things we don't understand, and it's very confusing, and then 20 million people are dead and 21 are maimed and shell-shocked, and you have Europe in flames and North Africa in flames. That's a little bit what those years have felt like to me. I just thought there could be a moment where someone decides because they hate Martha's Vineyard, they need to blow up the United States, or because they don't want to wear a square of, you know, fabric over their mouths during a pandemic, that they're going to, you know, blow up the Capitol. And it was one of those things that how would we ever explain to our children how this happened? You are so good at chronicling that confusion. Like, why are people talking about, they're not even, as you point out, they're not even talking about building a wall anymore. There is no policy that they're discussing. You have a wonderful moment where you point out that recently some Trumpites were saying, those damn Democrats, they overturned Roe.
Yes, yeah.
That's where they are. I mean, that's where we are, and we're complicit also in that confusion. But tell me about that confusion. Like, you must have felt while you were standing in the rally, what is this? What are they even saying?
I mean...
What are we even saying, as you would say?
Huh. I think they're saying... I mean, there's a way in which, and this is going to come... just bear with me. I'm sympathetic to this, right? I'm sympathetic to the idea that things as they are inadequate. And there's a chapter late in the book called The Great Acceleration. And accelerationism is this sort of kind of Mobius strip term that comes from these sort of French Marxist theorists, and then the right-wing intellectual says, that sounds great. And it is these theorists sort of saying, oh, we're so caught up in the process of democracy. And I guess I've become kind of stale and conservative enough that I'm like, I'm okay with the process. I don't need to accelerate it. And the right-wingers are like, yes, let's accelerate. Let's bring on the war, because this world as it is broken. And it's almost the diagnosis is correct. And I look at Ashley Babbitt, so Ashley Babbitt dies, obviously, and then as soon as she's killed by the police officer who kills her is black. And as soon as I saw that on January 6th, I'm an American. I know the lynching myth, and I know what they're going to do with it. And within days, they did. Black cop kills innocent white woman, right? And it's sort of like, it's, if you've ever seen D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, it's that story. And so I thought they were going to start accelerating, but then I look at Ashley Babbitt's life, two-time Obama voter, like so many of these people, and her diagnosis of things falling apart is correct, but her prescription is poison. And I think about this. All right, here's maybe only in New York would this example work. I think about, those guys, this part won't work, those guys who outfit their trucks with these special pipes that belch extra black, nasty smoke, right? See, climate change, this is how much I don't believe in you. Like, you had a truck, it was working fine, but now, like, you had to pollute more. Yiddish, way we can understand this is through Yiddish, like so many things. There used to be something called, and long ago, the Yiddish anarchist ball. And Yiddish anarchists, none of whom believed in God, and on Yom Kippur, they would have a pig roast. See, God, see how much I don't believe in you? And I think that's some of the chaos and the defiance. The world is breaking, and I don't accept it. Climate, you can't break me. Neoliberalism, you can't break me. Changing mores, you can't break me. And along comes a figure like Trump or DeSantis, or it doesn't matter, who says, relax. Just lean back into the undertow. Stop resisting. Go with the flow. And I think that's the accelerationism, as the undertow sort of pulls them out faster and faster.
I love this pig story because just as the MAGA crowd has really turned on something they call virtue signaling, which is clearly is so bothersome.
What are those pipes but virtue signaling?
Well,
virtue of not believing. Yeah.
Well, that or vice signaling, which is one of the things
Yeah.
I feel like you see a lot on the right, and it's a little bit exciting. It's just like that Ozzy Osbourne heavy metal. I'll do anything, and I can imagine seeing that. Just every transgression of Trump's just saying, you don't think I'll go this far? Well, I will tell you that, I don't like John McCain because I like people who weren't captured. Or, every now and then I'm sure it's the same with you. Something flies through your head. You cannot believe he called Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas. I'm just like, and now I'm spiraling on that, or he was, yeah. But so vice signaling is one part of it. But you said something, by the way, while you were just talking, which was, Ashley Babbitt's analysis is correct. You didn't have to say exactly right.
Diagnosis. I wouldn't say analysis is a strong term.
Her diagnosis of
she's fucked.
A world.
Her life was falling apart. She was correct.
But okay, tell me about that, because I know you remember the meme, and probably some people here do too. The images of some of the white supremacists on Charlottesville with something over them saying economic insecurity, right? So. Maybe I'll just draw it out and bore everyone to tears. But the point here is it's not economic insecurity that drives people. Like, in every effort to understand Trumpites, there's a nice materialist analysis that we all learned to do in school, where we talk about economic conditions and so on. But it didn't quite track, right? In 2016, you had Obama voters, you had people making, with high household incomes or relatively high household incomes, lots of middle class people, lots of lawyers, bankers, and so on, voting for Trump. So there wasn't the Weimar explanation that we have for fascism, and yet and then economic insecurity not being the motivation for voting for Trump. The guys in the picture, the white supremacists, clearly their motivation is racism, which I think is the argument of your book, that it's racism more than economic conditions.
No, I think I would say, like, is it economic or race? Yes. Is it misogyny or climate grief? Yes. Does white supremacy run like a river through all of it? Absolutely. I mean, that is the current that sets it in motion. I think that is the American story. That's the American story, but we live in a global fascist moment, and I think it's absolutely essential to understand, and I think Americans sometimes sort of say, like, what's wrong with us? What's wrong with Russia? What's wrong with China? What's wrong with Turkey? What's wrong with the Philippines? Bolsonaro's gone for now, and Brazil, but let's see how long, you know. It's a global fascist moment, and I think what fascism does, I think always has to be understood, and part of the way that I think we're not telling stories right about fascism is if we try and look at these sort of material things. Yeah. Fascism is always a dream politic, right? And I think of these guys in Youngstown, Ohio, right? And, you know, again, like so many of these guys, they were Obama voters, and they became Trump voters. They were deriding him for what a racist he was. But he says he's going to bring back the steel mills. They don't believe that. But wouldn't it be nice to think so? And someone like Ashley, the same Ashley who is, I don't mean this as some people see this as an excuse for these people. I see it just the opposite. You struggled to be a better human being. You struggled toward the democracy that we don't have. You know, I hear sometimes people speak of preserving democracy, like we're going to put it in a jam jar. We've never had democracy. You don't even have it. It's not something you have, it's something you do, and we haven't done it yet. And some people were invested in that struggle. And then along comes Trump and now DeSantis, and there will be others who say, just lean back. You don't have to struggle anymore, right? But I think you see all of those things, like in Ashley Babbitt's life, you see her deep, profound racism that she had suppressed and worked against, and now it comes out. I watched her mother cross over. I was at a rally for Ashley Babbitt in Sacramento, California, and her mother, Mickey, like Ashley, Ashley and Mickey are both spelled with an I for independence, she says. Mother had never been a political person, working class person, never really thought about politics, hated Trump for 6 months after January 6th because he didn't say anything about her daughter who had been killed, wrote him angry letters, but then he did, and she got on board, and she's at this rally, and the Proud Boys are all there, and they're lined up, and they're ready to fight, and they've got their studded gloves, they're sort of like brass knuckle gloves, and a group of self-identified Antifa protesters come around because there's a rally for Breonna Taylor on the other side, and they're chanting, "Black Lives Matter." And there's a moment there where Mickey Whithoff could have said, oh, there was someone who was killed by a police officer. My daughter was killed by a police officer. Let's make solidarity. Instead, she responds to their chant of Black Lives Matter with Ashley Babbitt, and they get in this shouting, Ashley, and it's her crossing over. It's her answer to Black Lives Matter. One white woman somehow equates with all that Black death. But you could see it happening in real time, of her just sort of giving up and embracing fascism and moving into this dream, which is a much more comforting place.
When I was hosting the show, I had you on Trumpcast. I was asked all the time, how do you talk to fascist, curious relatives and friends or Trump voters? You talked to so many of them. Was there an effort on you're a rhetorician? Was there an effort on your part to be persuasive? And what would that have looked like? I mean, could you really stand and dispassionately observe, or did you? Right.
I've never been dispassionate in my life. But that's also what allows me to have those conversations. These are not spaces to go into There's one place in the story where I was surrounded by Proud Boys, and they're kind of bumping chests with me, and it's sort of scary. And there's this other guy, the one Proud Boy who's not in body armor, and he's wearing a Snoopy T-shirt. And I had admired his Snoopy T-shirt. Or I said, "Red, white, and chill" with Snoopy. And I said, "Hey, that's a great shirt." And he said, "Thanks." He didn't know my name. And then he says, "No, no, don't worry, I vetted him." He didn't know my name, but I liked his Snoopy T-shirt. And so he gets me out of that scary fight. So in that moment, I was not about to say, "Well, fellas, I disagree with you strongly."
Yeah.
But I think I don't try and persuade them in the same way that, this idea of like, how do we persuade these folks? Well, like, I'm a cishet person, but I have a trans kid. And if someone says, "How do I persuade you that trans is wrong?" You don't. You don't. Don't try. If you do, fuck off. These folks who believe what they believe, I don't think the struggle is for persuasion. They have forced a "which side are you on" moment, like the great Florence Reese Labor song, and that's where we're at now. I'm talking to them not to persuade them, but to understand them, to find the fault lines in their movement, so that we can organize those of us who are still on the side of being human.
So that we can organize.
Yeah, so that we get. I mean, a couple of reviews came out of today of the book, and they're good. They're good reviews, but they say, "But he offers no solutions." And I'm like, "Oh, no, no, no! You didn't look. There's an appendix. What to do?"
Yes, exactly.
Step one,
Yeah.
get a lemon, and like, I don't know. I do think it's why I bracket the book or bookend the book with Harry Belafonte, right? And everybody knows Deo. Not everyone knows that was a radical song. That Harry Belafonte, who's still alive, is a very pissed off, angry old man because the movement that he really put his life into, the civil rights movement, that didn't succeed. He knows that. And I end it with a man named Lee Hayes. Not as many know, but if you know If I Had a Hammer or On Top of Old Smoky or so much of the American Songbook, that's Lee Hayes, part of a group called the Weavers. You might have heard of Pete Seeger. That was his songwriting partner. Lee was sort of in the background. And Lee was broken. Lee was called to testify before the Jim Jordan committee of his day, HUAC, the House on American Affairs Committee. And it broke him. It broke his heart. Neither of these guys succeeded, and I knew the last line of the book, I always knew it was going to be, that it was a line of Lee's, "For a while it was possible not to be scared even." Like that, and he said that, he wrote that about driving around in the Arkansas night with a group of labor organizers, and they were being chased, just like Harry got chased by the Klan in Mississippi. But they were singing, and they had that solidarity. So that, to me, when you said organizing, look, there's brilliant organizers and activists. I'm not one of them, I'm a writer, but I do think that we can look like that. The how, we look for those moments when we're not scared. And they're not all the time. I don't have any hope of hey, it's gonna be all right. Climate's not gonna be all right, It's why, well, I'll stop there, but that's what I mean by sort of organize, is I don't have a prescription, although, there are probably some people here who do, and that are good. They're good ideas. I'm all hands on deck. I won't criticize anybody's organizing effort right now.
Exposing the fault lines, though, does seem like one of the tasks of writing, and in particular, your writing. I want, you hinted at it, you used the metaphor, but I want to hear more about what you see as the undertow and how it stands in relation to the conceit, because we're not a civil war yet, the conceit of, quote, civil war.
I think we're in a slow civil war. I mean, we have every weekend, we have skirmishes between Proud Boys and drag show defenders. We have people attacking schools. We have whole states where queer folks and trans folks are essentially being criminalized. We have women dying because they can't get the reproductive care. And there's a chapter in the book, TikTok, about a woman driven by QAnon to start ramming her car into other cars that she thinks have children that are being stolen. This didn't make national news. It barely made local news where she is. this is so I do think there's like a simmer that's already happening in the Civil War. But I think sort of like to the larger sort of question of say the question again.
The relationship.
I got stuck thinking about that woman ramming her cars. Poor Evelyn, yeah.
Yeah. The relation between what you call Undertow, and I think it's a really,
Undertow, yeah,
really useful figure, and the slow motion Civil War.
Oh.
I mean, I think I tweeted on January 6th, well, this is Fort Sumter. I just couldn't see any way but that there would be a long-term clash of arms. And we just kept subduing the,
And we might. I don't
Civil
think
War.
actual Civil War is like, full Civil War is inevitable at all. Nothing is inevitable. I mean,
So
this
that's
is
why I want.
fascism wants us to believe in inevitability, and nothing is.
That's very smart. I mean,
But the Undertow. Well, the Undertow is, and I realized why I forgot it because I was sitting here trying to remember some of my publisher Norton. Some of the nice folks came out, and it was actually someone at Norton who thought of the title Undertow. And I thought that's a pretty good title. That really sort of explains because I've been writing about the right for so long, and some of the stories in the book are well sort of before Trump about these movements. I think of fascism as not a unified movement, right? What happens with any social movement, left or right, is when a whole lot of forces start converging, forces that were at odds with one another. And so I had these kind of, suddenly they're being pulled together. And then as I was driving across the country for the essay that's called The Undertow, I'm listening to Christian radio, as I do when I'm driving across the country, and I hear this preacher, and he's telling this story about the Undertow. And he's at the beach, and he's reading his Bible, as one does at the beach, and his wife says, Father, as one calls one's husband, Father, are our 3 sons drowning? Why, yes, I think they are. And so he runs out to rescue his sons, who apparently have been pulled out in the Undertow. And he sort of ends the story there. He doesn't tell whether his sons got rescued. The moral of the story is that you serve only God, and that your love, even for your children, should not get in the way for your love of God and God's mission for you. And I'm like, that's the Undertow, right? That's the Undertow. And, the Undertow is also things like I read about something called the men's rights movement, the MRAs, which I've covered a lot of right-wing movements. They're not the biggest or most dangerous, but they are the worst and the dumbest. Every other right-wing movement I've ever been to, I go because they're more interesting than their liberal caricature. The MRAs are actually dumber than their caricature, and their caricature is about as dumb as it gets, and they just like want to sit around and complain about their ex-wives and their ex-girlfriends or the girlfriends that they never had in the most violent terms. That's 2014, and they're talking about red pilling. They sort of one of the ones who brought that term. Yeah. Now, red pilling and that kind of misogyny and Andrew Tate, that's mainstream stuff. Yeah. The MRAs they were the avant-garde of their time, right? Yeah. So that's the Undertow, is sort of pulling all these social movements and us with them into this fascist moment.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's wonderful, and I think that gets at, it's just beautifully thought through. I think that gets at what I'm trying to ask about with the World War I question, which is that we know what happened, and we have, burning bodies, and I clearly have All Quiet in my head too much, but and trenches, and so many dead people, and so much of the world taken up by that. And we don't know the antecedents. No. Like, we just don't, there was like some, it has nothing like the shape of the Second War. And there's some anti-Semitism, there's Sarajevo, but it felt, to me, anyone who sought to understand and seeks to understand what's happening on the right could not have predicted that vaccines would get drawn into it, and yoga fanatics and mothers and wellness there would be a pipeline from them to January 6th.
Goop to fascism.
Right, goop to fascism, immediate, straight line. And I think the reason we need literary writers like you is partly because you acknowledge that so much of that cannot be quantified, could not have been predicted, And that if we go back and pretend, oh, well, it was just because we were all suffering so much under Obama, because the economy was so, because inflation was so, because we had just suffered a huge war. No, none of the material explanations fully add up.
No, they not only don't add up, they really undersell the power of fascism. And
Yes.
they're very complementary to us because those fools, right? And as opposed to recognizing, people are going to hate me for this, the imagination of that movement.
That's it. That's absolutely, I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, and you know, part of this is you know, I drive around the country a lot, right? And I have, I think, in my phone about pictures of 200 variations of fascist flags now, right? And then there's grain silos painted with various things. There's people. It's a friend of mine is a Smithsonian curator, and he's starting to think about, oh, I have to collect this fascist Americana folk art. There are actually, and the good news is you get to the cities, there are more rainbow flags, trans equality flags, and Black Lives Matters banners, but they're all the same thing. And most people order them from Amazon. Whereas these folks are out here like, what, how, I want to paint a beautiful, I'm going to mow my lawn into, you know, Trump's butt or something like this. Because my neighbor's got his face, but nobody's got his butt. You know, they're all competing. That's scary because that's a movement with imaginative power. And it's a movement that's also sort of like, you talk about World War I and like the antecedents. And right before I came over here, I was talking with folks from Norton and Meredith out there somewhere was sort of saying, I think the Gilded Age, and this sort of question of where it begins, because for Ashley Babbitt and Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, when did January 6th happen? Well, obviously 1776, the spirit of 1776, which they speak of as like the Holy Ghost, as part of the Holy Trinity. And there's just a little passage here, if I could do this.
Please.
We're on different timelines. The current year, or 1776, the forever election of 2020, or 1619, backwards or beyond, past 2030, last chance, say some scientists, to keep the temperature down, into an age of elegy. In which I'm at a militia church, in which this congregation's tears, or yours or mine, will all be equal, liquid milliliters added to the deepening ocean. And I think that's, when you talk about the millions dead of World War I, you know, where does World War I begin? Is it here? Is it with this political maneuver? And then suddenly there's just millions of bodies. Yeah. And any analysis that we make is going to be both inadequate and will probably obscure some of the forces, the dangerous forces that are out there that are coming at us, that I think are filled with a terrible imagination.
So I think we may not totally agree on this or be in the same position. Let's try. I'm going to try this out. It's actually not the question that I.
Yeah.
The sort of
Virginia warned me that she was going to disagree with something, and I said only one thing. So we're good.
Well, this is something else. So there was a moment when I was writing weekly op-eds, and I was doing a podcast entirely focused on the former president, a couple of times a week, and I was so steeped in things. You know, you could name any person that had once met with Paul Manafort. I knew, Natalia Veselnitskaya, person number 17, who was in the office, the Trump Tower meeting about adoptions, and even more about Preet Bharara. And so all these names were in my dreams. I mean, I think I said the name Mike Flynn once in my sleep. And during the pandemic, I just made this absolute promise to myself. I mean, I might as well have looked in the mirror and I said, if we ever get a vaccine and if we ever get a new president, I will take a breath and I will stop tweeting and writing op-eds. I just decided the two forms were going to bury me. But I was, if Trump had been reelected, I would have just kept at it because I don't know, and I don't have other good solutions, just like you said.
But Trump was reelected, Virginia.
Well, only in all the states where the fraud was. But I feel like I'm alone in having acknowledged something, which is that Joe Biden won the 2020 election, decisively won. And in some ways, our constant fear that it's this, there's like a D.W. Winnicott line. Sometimes the patient needs to be told that the catastrophe for fear of which he can't go on has already happened. Do you sometimes think that we are now rehearsing something that happened, that culminated in the storm on January 6th that was terrible, but that our nation recovered in this crazy way where it went back and did the certification on the very day of January 6th? The other thing that that day is known for is that Congress took a break and then came back, and even Mike Pence came back, and they sat there and did the tedious work of democracy, as you might call it, to do this pro forma exercise and seal in the next president, whom so many of them objected to. And then, bam, bam, they do the impeachment, they do the thing, the inauguration. Lady Gaga was singing, and I just thought, I am not going to pretend that the problem that is behind me isn't ahead of me, That doesn't mean there aren't more problems coming, but just for fear of another Trump or another, we may miss whatever either opportunities or threats are ahead of us.
I mean, the fever has broken, but I don't think it has. That's the sort of the line, the fever has broken. And I know you're offering sort of a more sophisticated example of it, but I do think, forgive me, and we know each other, so we can disagree like this. No, I don't think so. I think it's worse now. I mean, most of this book takes place after Trump. Most of the violence that I encounter takes place after Trump. And Trumpism doesn't need Trump. It doesn't need DeSantis. In the same way that the age of Reagan can arguably be said to have stretched from 1980 to 2016. The way that it was sort of formative of our government. That's there. And the reality is, I look at, Virginia grew up where I now live, and you went to Hanover High.
That's right.
Hanover High is now being sued by a wealthy family that wants a list of all the queer and trans kids. A list, just so that they know. And let's look at history and people who have gathered lists of those whom they see as deviant. Turning Point USA had a person go into Hanover High and take videos of it. Now, Hanover, this little town, said no, although the people suing it are from Hanover. My kids, that's where my kids go to school. My kids go to school in a school where increasingly they're facing in New Hampshire being criminalized. It's a weird school district. One half is elementary is in Vermont, high school is in New Hampshire. In elementary school, you can learn all about slavery. And high school, well, it was complicated. There were certain people who didn't like other certain people, and that's New Hampshire, which is hardly, it's sort of why I wrote about Wisconsin as well. People said, why did you write about Wisconsin? And I don't mind saying this. My child was in a mental health program in Wisconsin, so I was there, and we drove across country. We saw this parade of flags. My kid, who is a queer trans kid, how do I tell that kid that the fever has broken when half the states are now passing laws against them? I think, to me, the fever is escalating. I should also say 20 years of writing about the right. The great thing, and I've talked to other journalists who do this, a great thing was it didn't matter where you went. People always said, well, it's no accident you came to this church or this militia compound or whatever. God sent you here and you're going to be converted, right? Or they thought, well, you're a godless heathen, but it doesn't matter. You're going to send our message. Now, in Omaha, Nebraska, a church usher brings out a militia guy, tells me to get the hell out of there. I say, but I just got a pencil, and they've got a gun, and you brought a man with a gun. And the usher's response is, how do you know I don't have a gun? Which I think is the American question right now. That's not long ago. That's post-Trump. Yeah. Ron DeSantis' state militia is post-Trump. So I don't think the fever is broken. Hasn't broken in Russia, hasn't broken in China. we have, it's not inevitable, but Biden is slowed it down. Let's build on that.
Yeah, I mean, and almost no one agrees with me on this at all. But I guess I sometimes fear that we believe Trump when he says he won the election. And it was like a former Republican friend
And that
of mine
he's the
who said,
19th president of the United States, as some churches in the
That's
book
right.
are saying. Like,
That thing is so
every
complicated.
president since has been illegal.
illegitimate, right?
And
Except-
but wait, still we believe it. That's sort of fascinating thing, because I'm looking around at people in the church. They're hearing this for the first time, that Trump is only the 19th president, and they're like, but it says 45 on his hat.
Yeah.
But the way to understand that and that belief, and I think about there's an anthropologist named Susan Friend Harding, wrote this great book about Jerry Falwell. Not Junior, who's gotten into all these scandals, but his father, who got into different scandals. Moral Majority, and she starts going to Liberty Church and his big church in Virginia, and trying to understand it. And she's like, wait a minute, he's telling the same story sermon to sermon, except he's changing. You can hear him lying in real time. Why do they believe him? And I'm simplifying it terribly, but what she understands is that it becomes this sort of, oh, they're experiencing this as collaborative. We are making this story together. This is a democratic experience. When you go to a Trump rally, he does the same thing. He'll tell one story, and many people go to his rallies like deadheads. I've met people who've gone to 70, 80 rallies, travel around the country. They hear the same story, and they hear it differently. It doesn't bother them. So when you say, it's a little bit like you say, it's almost like we're believing, and I'm like, that's, yes. It's not just theater. The fact that it has that gravity to pull people into that belief. No, he's not actually the president. And will that matter if a military base commander decides, you know what? I'm not sure whose president is. I think he's a president.
Yeah, well, there definitely was a moment on January 6th where I thought, and my husband thought, that if he, as the commander-in-chief, was able, as Mike Flynn proposed that he do, to bring in tanks. And
I don't think
Tom
people in
Cotton
Brooklyn know who Mike Flynn is. We were at
Is that true?
We were at a cafe before this, and I saw there was a book behind my friends, and it said Michael Flynn, and it was like this manly science fiction cover, Lodestar. And I'm like, that's amazing. And they're like, what? It's okay, Jeff. You're in Brooklyn now. It's
Full
safe.
sci-fi person. Oh, right, exactly.
General Michael Flynn, Trump's first national security advisor, and who is sort of fairly open in his calls for civil war.
An avatar of Q, too. QAnon. Okay. Well, you mentioned. I'll like try to tell you my good news later in the green room. Why the reasons I still think it's worth acknowledging that Trump is no longer the president, and that.
I fully acknowledge.
And that there have been some great policy successes.
Oh, there have, yeah.
From Joe Biden. And also, the country's riven with problems. They just are different problems than in 2018, 2019, that are in interesting ways, in ways we couldn't have predicted.
Oh, yeah, I think I agree with you.
So, you mentioned Russia. There's this... I think a lot of people heard Putin's first justification for going into Ukraine, but
gays.
Well, the denazification was one of the first. That he.
So you go back to like 2013, 2014, and if you go back into the rhetoric of American. So I was in Russia in 2013 when he began his anti-LGBTQ campaign, and reporting on that. And I was in Uganda in 2009, and the rhetoric was always that they've been talking, the far right has been talking about this for a long time, looking at the queer men who were part of Hitler's early circle. And there were. And they used that to sort of say, fascism, queerness is the real fascism, and it always was.
Yes.
So those things are not an either or. To them, it's another example of gays are Nazis. To them, they say yes.
Right. Because of the cruder masculinity associated, as you rightly point out. with the kind of co-option of First Nations peoples things and the Q shaman. But this is what I mean about how confusing and Byzantine and interesting and imaginative it gets, damn it. Like, as you say, there's a lot of rhetorical energy on the side that seems undepletable so far. I mean, I thought, well, they found out who Q is, and Q's no longer making drops anymore. I'm sure that someone will say, we've got to fold up our tents and go home, but just dreamt up weird new stuff about textbooks and, queer kids in my old high school or whatever. So that does strike me as interesting. And you're right that this has been a preoccupation of Putin's. But it was, I think, in the second justification for the war where he really brought it home. I don't know if people heard this, but he said that Russians sympathetic to Ukraine, and of course Zelensky in Ukraine and Europe, were kind of craven, groveling before elites. And then he named 3 things that he associates with elites. So Ron DeSantis thinks it's Martha's Vineyard. People might think it's avocados or Brooklyn. But Putin thinks it's foie gras, oysters, and gender freedoms.
I dislike 2 of those things. Wow.
Really?
Common ground.
Well, right. I mean, right. So these are like these pinky teacup, just as ridiculous as you can get, jokes about, I guess, like fammy Parisian food or whatever, and that's expensive. And then, blammo, gender freedoms. Yeah. At the same time, his Alexander Dugin, his Rasputin, says that's right. We want
Alexander Dugin's like the Steve Bannon of Russia,
Bannon for Putin.
But smarter.
But smarter, wilder thinker, interesting and terrifying. But he said in his justification, Russia is withdrawing from the global world order. We don't this Euro trash, oysters, whatever. We don't want anything to do with it. We're withdrawing from civil rights, human rights, and ultimately, he said, humanity itself.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
So this crazy thing that I think comes up in the book over and over again is how bedeviling the like Macbeth. Is this a dagger I see before me? It's like this oyster. What is going on in my crazy mind? This oyster, and then I'm seeing a trans person, and then I'm seeing the EU, and then I'm seeing NATO, and then I'm seeing some elites and Obama and Hillary, and all of that means I want to withdraw from humanity. Yeah. And that's what Dugin says is happening with the war. How did this happen? How did that concatenation of things come to be so terrifying to a group of armed and very angry people?
I think of it, most people maybe have heard of this phrase, the Dark Enlightenment. Peter Thiel.
Please explain it.
So Peter Thiel is, this Silicon Valley billionaire who is apparently funding a big part of the downtown arts scene now and sort of encouraging, so I read in Vanity Fair. Not being a part, never, having read that article, was I so glad to not be young and in New York. I was like that. All these sort of young people think fascism is transgressive, but I think that Dark Enlightenment idea and that rejection, I mean, where does that begin? That's hard. That's a hard call. I think there's a figure named Francis Schaeffer, who you probably know, and people don't realize that white evangelicals used to be pro-choice. Billy Graham used to be pro-choice. The Republican Party used to be pro-choice. Being against abortion, that was a dirty thing that the Catholics did. And they used to hate Catholics a lot. And this is actually to me, one of the huge things that's not been written enough about, like this sort of merger of evangelicals and right-wing Catholics.
And Opus Dei and
Yes.
Bannon and
So Francis Schaeffer in the early 70s was this guru who had this sort of retreat in France. And all of the architects of the modern right would travel up there, and he'd do things like play Beatles records backwards, and they'd stay up. He was a bohemian. He was the predecessor to Dimes Square, and he identified the threat to the world to be secularism, right? And what is secularism? It's the Enlightenment.
Yes.
And
yes.
the interesting thing is, then you start digging into it, and this is why it's not surprising that accelerationism comes from this kind of French leftist theory. There's all kinds of problems with the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment's not so great. The Enlightenment hasn't given us democracy because we haven't gotten democracy yet. We haven't done it yet. It got us that far, and I'm for it. I'm for the going back into the Capitol and voting, and I'm, God bless Mike Pence on that one day.
Absolutely amazing, astonishing. Told he was going to be hanged, and then decided to go. I mean, it just,
But not enough.
Strange story.
Not enough. Not enough. Harry Belafonte and Lee Hayes, the bookends, are these people who are calling us to imagine this long struggle. It's not enough. And if you sit there and say, let's fall back onto the democracy we have, the Alexander Dugins and the Steve Bannons and the Dime Squarers, they are going to keep advancing because they have this powerful critique of the way things are. And, I think of the way... more excellent. I write for Vanity Fair, so it's like I'm selling from the stage. But I'm not selling my story. An excellent piece about these sort of far-right Back to the Landers that recently appeared in Vanity Fair. The surprise that people experience when they find out that all these white supremacists and white supremacist adjacent groups, they love organic food. Natural midwifery and birth, they love all these things. As fascism always has. This isn't new. But I think that is where we sort of have to start. We have to come up with our own imaginative ways of moving the Enlightenment forward instead of just saying, no, we figured it out. How dare you challenge it?
Yeah, that's brilliant. All right, before so no one's signaling me that we need something move to questions, but I'll unilaterally decide we're moving to questions after one. I just want to ask you personally, what was sort of the most harrowing moment of reporting in the stories in this book for you?
Most harrowing moment in 30 years of journalism for me. And I've been in ostensibly scarier places and more people with guns, and they were actually pointed at me and so on. But this was just so startling. And I said before, it used to be, as a journalist, I could always go into these spaces, even though they knew who I was. I would always tell them I'm a Jew just because it helped move things along. They're like, we better explain things to you. And I said, please, tell me more, explain. And in this church in Omaha, the Lord of Hosts Church, Pastor Hank Kuhneman, who is a sort of a minor big league prophet on the far right, regularly sort of appears with Michael Flynn and Congresswoman Boebert and those kinds of figures. And this church service, which is amazing. The music, fantastic. It's great. I should also say, because I think it's important to understand how fascism is moving now, far more diverse than most progressive churches, liberal Protestant churches that are not black churches. The liberal Protestant church is a fairly segregated space in America. This is a very diverse church, very racist church, very almost openly white supremacist church, and they've got men with guns all over, and they're preaching about Psalm 23, which is the sort of that's the one you hear at funerals and so on. It's yes, and thy rod and thy staff, thy rod is a gun, and this is what the pastor says. He says that's why I've got those men around there. They won't talk to me, so I go out and I'm talking to these women who had driven like me many hours to go to this church, but because they believed in it, and they're telling me about the coming Civil War and just chatting about. Yes, I don't ask. You don't have to ask. It's just sort of like, hey, how you doing? It's how about those Mets? It's the Civil War is coming.
March Madness.
And as I say, one of the guys in tactical gear comes out, and the usher comes out, and they were just so uninterested. And I realized, and I think this is one of the things I learned at Trump rallies, the enemy within for Trumpism. And it's always mutating. Right now, it's really focused on trans folks. Remember, at the beginning of the Trump administration, it was Muslims. It's also been undocumented people. It is always all of those people at the same time. But a really high quality enemy within, journalists. Because they move amongst you unseen. There may be some in the room right now you wouldn't know. Your own son or daughter could become a journalist, right? This invisible. And it was just, he had already preached against me. He had been from the pulpit, had preached against me. And he tells me to get out. And I realized this was a different moment. They're telling me to get out. And all of my years in journalism, when there's bad guys, they puff out their chests and they stick out their chin. And I'm not a fighter, but I slowly realized that that's probably okay, because someone who's sticking out their chin is not really going to hit you. That's not a good thing to do if you're going to get in a fight. And this usher just sort of curls himself up, and the gunman steps up, and it's about 90 degrees, and I have a heart condition, so I'm thinking, I'm not supposed to be in these places anymore. And I realized they're going to, at best, hit me. They really are. They're not worried about the consequences. They're sure not worried about the cops. And I just turned and I ran. Journalists aren't brave. The art of journalism is running. It was scary both because of the moment, but also because of just like, oh, this is a pivot point. All my years of going to right-wing churches, I've never seen anything like this.
All right. I hope that those of you who haven't seen the book recognize or got a taste of the richness of the prose. At some point, you refer to something as like a lucid dream, and there's a way that you can stay in the state of lucidity and allow yourself to dream. And it's been costly for you. I mean, it's emotionally costly, and sometimes quite, actually traumatic. I mean, these are really hard ideas to be exposed to. So you feel that in the prose. It's a beautiful book. So please read it. Any questions for Jeff?
Hi there, thank you. You said Trumpism doesn't need Trump, but how do you see his power? And sorry to ruin the beautiful literariness of this evening with talking about hard politics, but how do you see his power at this very moment and going into 2024 as a politician?
Have the news on downtown Manhattan. Maybe there'll be a perp walk. I don't want to be too much an optimist.
Hi, Claire. That's my wonderful Vanity Fair editor. Did you see? I probably sold subscriptions. I get a commission for every subscription I sell. I think today was a good day for him, don't you? I was driving down Vermont and from Vermont, and sort of I was listening to Virginia's great book, Magic and Loss, which is about the internet and internet as art object, but is also, I think, you published that in 2016, right? I mean, I kept on saying, oh, this explains so much of that lucid dreaming and the way that social media and all that works together. But then I would flick over to the radio, and all day CNN, MSNBC, Fox, we're talking about Trump. So I think today was a big victory, but I don't think it matters. I really don't. And I think anyone talking about who's worse, DeSantis or Trump, it's a little bit like saying who's worse, Hitler or Stalin. To the millions of dead, it means nothing. And I actually know some people will say, well, Stalin wasn't so bad. Ask a Ukrainian. I think both of these men, in different ways, and they represent different kinds of fascism. I think Trump represents the burlesque. DeSantis represents the sort of the pious. If you've seen that ad where it has a sort of like an old-time preacher, God sent a protector, and it's an old-time preacher, and a man to save the nation, and it's Ron DeSantis. 6 of one, half dozen of the other, and I wouldn't be surprised if 2 years from now we're talking about neither, and yet someone else, but I'll still call it the Trumpocene. I think he opened the door. There is a pivot point. And those who say, but America's always been like this, the undertow has always been there. But, you know, he just sort of opened the door and the water comes rushing in. That's what I think. I don't know. What do you think, Claire? I mean, I want to see him arrested too. It's just gonna, you know, you take your happy moments where you can. Like, I'm gonna enjoy it. I don't know if it helps him or not, and I think it's hard to know. You don't think it does, huh?
I like it when reality asserts itself, and the idea of just him in restraints is, I think, meaningful to the electorate. I mean, just him handcuffed, and you know, I think Elie Mystal was saying, you know, sometime there's going to have to be muscle. He said this before January 6th. And there did have to be muscle on the part of the state. And I think, you know, there's just something satisfying
Did you
and
do this very
necessary
healthy
to see him
thing?
brought to heel, even briefly.
Did you do this very healthy thing when, after Biden was elected, and I'm sure you used to get all of Trump's daily emails, right? Do you still get them?
No.
Oh, so Trump has been emailing for several days now. Friends, this may be the last time I speak to you. It's a noble thing I do. And, you know, he's Sidney Carton in Tale of Two Cities. He's like, you know, he's going off, and he's been, I mean, so I'm not sure Trump in handcuffs. And I do think this is a martyrdom phase, right? So, like, if in the book we have the prosperity gospel phase, that was the election. Then I think we have the sort of bastardized Gnostic gospel phase, and that's sort of the darker turn of QAnon. I think the reason Ashley Babbitt occupies so much space in the book is that we're now in this place of martyrdom. And Trump is seeing an opportunity. Like, we're in a martyr phase, not the Trump phase. Trump's like, oh, I could be the martyr. And, you know, that the martyrdom stick is going to pass around. Let me be the martyr. But I think, so I don't know. But who knows?
I guess that's why I want the real to assert itself, and the real usually asserts itself in the form of bodies. I mean, if Trump is able to fundraise off his time in jail, in other words, to bifurcate, be actually in prison, or even briefly restrained, or be a ward where the justice system has asserted itself, as it has done with so many people since Trump came to power, and finally for the FBI and then the sheriff's office and to collaborate and put him behind bars even for a minute is, in a way, I care less about whatever kabuki he dreams up. It's like we buy it. You say well, he's just a martyr. Really? Like, anyone who spends one night in jail tells you that is not something that, oh, good, I'll be able to use this,
I mean, the thing about martyr, and I can think about people who say that Ashley Babbitt's not a martyr. We don't get to choose who the martyrs are. A martyr is not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a story, right? And stories aren't good things. The never-ending story. Well, if it's a bad story, it's terrible. So I think, yeah, right, one night in jail, he's not going to go to one night in jail, but, even, he's not going to get cuffs, but even being arrested, he's playing the martyr. It's not real. And, there's a passage in the book about, I think it's in the introduction, where I talk about this sort of lesson that I learned long ago, sort of writing my first book, Killing the Buddha, with my friend Peter Mansell, and we were traveling around, and an individual had gone into a church and started shooting, and thank God there were blanks. No one was hurt. We go to speak to the local sheriff about this complicated story, and, we're a couple New Yorkers. We weren't a couple, but we just assumed we were, and we just sort of let that ride, and we got our New York plates, and Sheriff Thomas Breedlove, and I should not make fun of, my family's Southern rural, but anyway, this guy was like out of a movie. And he did not like us at all, and he drove a big white Cadillac, and he was just the character. But he pulls a gun out of his desk, and he points it at us. And, we just about piss our pants. And then he explains, it's just a toy gun. But if we had pulled that on him, he would have shot us. And this is his moral. He says, that's just to show you that things that aren't real can still hurt you, right? So, I mean, this is sort of where I kind of think like to your reality and mine, let's focus on the dream. That's another kind of yes. I say yes to both of those. I hate to use this word, but I don't think, unfortunately, we're past the stage of reality trumping the dream. And if we weren't, then we wouldn't be in the climate space that we're in now, which is sort of like another undertow within this book, right? We're living in this dream. We have till 2030, maybe. We're living in a dream that energy is okay. So I don't know how much reality can assert itself.
Yeah, I mean, and that the book is like in this flicker in a really interesting way. I mean, I have so much, of course, in response that I'll tell you at drinks afterward.
Right.
But the fact that it's a 0-1 proposition to me that Donald Trump no longer controls the American nuclear arsenal or the armed forces.
Well, according
It's
to this
0-1.
church, he does. But that,
Oh, okay.
I agree with you.
But I
He
mean,
doesn't.
Just because people say it, right, doesn't mean it's the case. Like, COVID was a real thing with real bodies, and Trump and others told us it wasn't. And we still had to maintain that it was a real thing, and the democracy is a real thing, and the election was not stolen from Donald Trump, and it was a free and fair election. And we just have to keep a little bit of a pulse star on real things also
Yeah,
happen.
I mean, the book sort of also has that current, like, Ashley Babbitt is motivated. Why does she invade the Capitol? To save the 800,000 children who are abducted every year, right?
Right.
In fact, 800,000 children do disappear every year. 99% of them, it's like the babysitter didn't get them in time, someone called the police or something. 99%, the number who are actually abducted, by a stranger in the park, the low hundreds, right? But Ashley has this number. So in the book, I do want to go back and forth between that pulse of this is what they say and this is what is. Mm-hmm. But there's a part where a preacher says to me, did you know that there's no word for coincidence in the Bible? And I see some of my religious studies friends there. But I called a friend of mine who wrote a book, Professor Seth Sanders of UC Davis, who wrote a book on Hebrew and Aramaic and those languages, and he was like, yes, there is. Yes, there is, and it's this, and I don't know Hebrew, so I can't say it, but it's in the book, and I think that idea that, in fact, let me just find this passage because I think it's kind of relevant. It's satisfying when an expert flattens a false claim. That's how so many of us believe we'll resist the undertow of civil war, fact-checking our way back to solid ground. But much like the cross for Pastor Dave, in this militia church, they don't have the cross because it's kind of sissy. It's not for the warrior Christ. The pulpit is made of swords. But much like the cross for Pastor Dave, such corrections miss the point. You can't fact-check a myth. Like, QAnon's not real, and,
Yeah. Yes, right here in the center, in red.
The various people you've been meeting, you've been talking about tonight in your travels in this underbelly of America. What about the people who simply see themselves as conservative, right-wing, in a less delusional way, for want of a better term? I mean, the tiny number of old-fashioned Republicans is some of us who are above the age of 30 can remember. And who simply voted for Trump as the Republican candidate and against the Democratic policies that they oppose. And did you encounter, or maybe you were just in the world of the true MAGA believers, whom traditional Republicans, many of them, are embarrassed by, and if you could talk about these different types of people who voted for Trump, if you will.
I mean, I will say this. This will be my thing for those conservatives. I think the never Trumpers are actually more aware of the threat and the danger than a lot of centrists and liberals right now. So I look at like publications like The Bulwark, and they're very comfortable using the term coup and fascism, and I give a lot of credit to them, even as I think here we are in the sort of anniversary of the Iraq War, and I'm like, oh right, you were the guys who helped kill 1 million Iraqis, you know. So I'm not so infatuated with the good old conservatism. And certainly that war, by the way, you know, when you spend time at Trump rallies, you meet a lot of Iraq vets, and they sound like the same folks that I was out protesting with in 2004. They hated the war of blood for oil. Again, the diagnosis is correct. Their prescription, fascism, is what's wrong. But I think, you know, I mean, and there's good scholars of fascism like Robert Paxton and Jason Stanley and so on, who sort of note that fascism, it's very rarely a majority, and it always proceeds with, you know, the acceptance of people who can get along with it, right? The very folks who are saying like, I would never vote for Trump, but maybe Ron DeSantis. Or I would never vote for Ron DeSantis, but Nikki Haley is bringing the party back to where it was. Nikki Haley, who, did anyone see this 2 days ago, said 90% of kindergartners in America are under the control of critical race theory and are being taught that white kids are bad. And I'm just sort of thinking, like, does that mean that my kids in one of these 10% schools, it's not being taught? Are they being left behind? They're not. And like that's, or in New Hampshire, Chris Sununu is one of those moderate Republicans. And for a long time, he would be an obstacle to those movements in the party. Now he's thinking of running for president. And suddenly the anti-trans laws and the anti-queer laws and the anti-teacher laws, they're flowing. The Undertow is pulling fast now. And he's out there saying, hey, I'm not like Trump. That is crazy. We've got to get away from that. I don't see the never-Trumpers, the hardcore never-Trumpers. I really admire them. They're on the front lines. And, you know, solidarity with anyone who's going to resist fascism. But the ones who say, like, yeah, I don't really like him. And yeah, I meet lots of those folks. I never, as a reporter, I don't really go and say, except for going to Trump rallies, I don't say, I'm going to go and find the nastiest person. I just drive down the road, and that's what's there. You know, I mean, and they're not nasty. They're the folks that are there. They're my neighbors. They're maybe not your neighbors here, but.
Thanks. One last question. Yeah.
We could say the left was more anti-American imperialism, and now you have things. I went to a Lauren, but I'm from Western Colorado. I went to a Lauren Boebert rally to see what was going on, and she had this whole quote about how Tesla was going to be mining lithium in Bolivia and the poor Bolivians, you know, like, which I thought was so interesting because what a bizarre thing for a Republican to say. Wouldn't you be all about mining in a third world country?
That was before Elon Musk bought Twitter, and now.
Right.
Yay, Tesla.
Yeah. So I do wonder in the same regard now, how are non or anti-Trump people, that swath of the population, changing as we see the thing that we are against changing? I find myself in the uncomfortable position now of being, you know, like patting, like we were talking about before, patting people on the back who are like Romney Republicans who started the Iraq War, which I consider to be one of the most horrible things that I've witnessed in my 23-year long life. So I just, you know, how are we changing on the other side of the fence, and what does that mean for us and our relationships?
How are we changing? Is that what, like, what?
Like, are we being pushed to the right because suddenly we're like, oh,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, the center slouch is rightward, I think. And that's the sort of the I mean, you know, right-wingers love to have this, what is it, the Overton window, this corny concept they have, but they're right. And they keep shifting things So that, some folks know about New York Times' trans coverage, which has been horrendous, right? Well, it's a question, though. Do these people really exist? It's not quite that bad, but in fact, questions of basic human existence suddenly seem legitimate for discussion. And the premise, well, maybe the schools have gone too far, right? I teach on a college campus. I'm very aware of students who sometimes have pretty kind of ridiculous ideas and will, there's a wonderful Indian writer named Sonia Falero, and some of my students attacked her as a white Western imperialist. And I'm like, she's an Indian writer. And they just didn't even bother to find that. So that's an excess, right? I could call that into the Times and get a story about that. These are 18-year-olds. Think of the stupid shit you said when you were 18. I think of the stupid shit I say now. This is in no way comparable, and I think but it's what it's reflective of is that rightward pull. At the same time, there is also a sort of hardening on the left, and maybe this is a good thing to end with, is the kids in Wisconsin and Black River Falls, yes, Wisconsin, because they're in some ways, along with Harry and Lee Hayes, they're heroes of the book. Black River Falls is this little town in sort of central Wisconsin, and I drive in, and I'm driving around Wisconsin after the fall of Roe, when Wisconsin became, at that time, I think still the only blue state in which abortion was illegal, no exceptions. It reverted to 1849 law. Wisconsin's very gerrymandered. It's actually probably a blue state, but Republicans have an almost absolute control of it, except for the governor still vetoing. And these young women, high school students and college students, are standing on the bridge over the Black River, and there's this one girl, she's a cheerleader for the Black River Falls Tigers, and she's got Peyton, and she's got a sign that says, "Fuck off." And that is her message to me, to the generation that has failed her, the generation that said, trust the process. This is where I'm sympathetic. She's like, the hell with this. These institutions have failed us. The Supreme Court failed me. I'm growing up into a world in which I am becoming more and more unequal. And so I spent some time with them, and small town, you go to a Perkins, and they were just like loading up on waffles and pancakes at 11 at night, like if you've been 18 in a small town, like that's what you do. I tentatively, but they were all like student body presidents and this kind of thing. And I bring up Civil War, and they're like, yeah. And they were ready. They were ready for it. And I said, well, what do you mean you're ready for it? One woman, instead of going to college, is joining the Navy to get skills, to get ready. She's like, I've got to fight for my rights. All but one was armed and knew how to shoot, and that one was the archer. And she was their leader, and she said, she's like our Katniss, Hunger Games. There's a little bit, something heartbreaking about that, about this group of lovely young people trying to imagine their future. The archer had wanted to be an academic, but instead she thinks she's going to fight. I think they're in a dream state too. But there's also, I want to say, there's something very hopeful about that. I don't think they're ever going to be called Red Dawn style, Wolverines to raise up the arms. I think they are ready for the long struggle, and they understand that struggle is part of their life, and they understand that, yeah, you need the institutions, but they're not going to be enough. So that's a change. These were not hipster radical kids. These were the squarest. I love Wisconsin. It's one of my favorite states. These were the most Wisconsin kids I'd ever met. They were this could have been 2022. It could have been 1980. It could have been not 1950 because they were queer and some of them were indigenous and they wouldn't have all been sitting together at that time. But otherwise, they were nice, wonderful, square kids who were also pushed to that hard left. But I think maybe that's what's needed. It is this which side are you on moment, and they're ready for the long struggle, and they've got imagination, and their imagination's going to, I think, hopefully carry them further than their guns. So that's my hope.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia, for your great questions, and Jeff for your work, for the Undertow, and for your staying here to sign books. If you'd like to buy Jeff's book, get in this line on your way out. If you'd like to get your book that you already have signed, get in this line on your way out. And thanks again. We couldn't do this without you all being here, so thanks for being here.